Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the SFG20 Virtual Summit 2024, and the first panel discussion in which we're going to talk about net zero carbon. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we're hopefully going to have a very interesting and informative discussion about net zero, and particularly how we as building managers and building owners can impact the journey to net zero. We have a fantastic panel here of people around, and I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves first. So, Claire.
I'm Claire Curran. I'm the MD of Linaker and immediate past president for BESA.
I'm Alistair Scott, Founding Director of Integrated Estates Management and Carbon Dot.
I'm Charlotte Wincup, co-owner and director of Bloom Building Consultancy.
I'm Harry Leeson, Managing Director of Perfecta Investments.
Yeah, morning. Dave Parrott, Director from Kadima Consulting Services.
And I'm Mark Sutcliffe. I'm the Chief Exec of Lorne, Stewart Facilities Services. And throughout this, you've got the opportunity online to submit questions to us, and hopefully we'll get to those towards the end of the discussion. So everybody, I wanted to open the discussion with some interesting statistics about the built environment and carbon reduction. 40% of global carbon emissions are from the built environment, and 30% of that is operational. So that means 10% of that is from the building and demolition of buildings. So we've got 30% of the emissions are down to us as building owners and building managers. 80% of all the buildings that are currently in use as non-residential will be here in 2050. So we're facing a huge retrofit issue as well. And the Prime Minister announced obviously last week that we're going to reduce carbon by 80% between now and 2035. So some pretty big numbers there. So we're really going to impact that journey. So that's really the core of the discussion today. But we do face our issues. We face issues around funding. We face issues around skill shortages. We face issues around technology and how the technology can help us on that journey. So hopefully we'll get into that discussion as we get through. So without further ado, I'm going to start talking to you, open the question here and start directing that perhaps at Dave, who's on the consultancy journey, and Charlotte as well. Just by Dave, what do you think, working in consultancy, what are the key issues for someone starting on that journey to develop a carbon reduction plan?
So I think for me, Mark, the thing is, and as you rightly said in your introduction, there's a lot of data and there's a need to capture a lot of data to start that journey. But before you get to that stage even, I think for me there's three really important strategic questions that need answering. So firstly, I'd like organisations to understand why they're doing this journey. And I mean, everybody understands the need for carbon net zero, but actually specific to their business, specific to their organisation, why they're doing it, what's the actual impact on their DNA as a business. Second thing is how they're going to get their stakeholders within their business to impact and affect that journey. So that could be C-suite directors, it could be customers, colleagues on the front line, a whole range of different stakeholders. They'll all have an input into how that journey flows and how successful it is. And then the third thing is, excuse me, how they're going to pay for it. So what's the kind of payback periods, how they're going to get investment in that and make sure that journey kind of kicks off in the right way. And that could just be commercial payback, but also the non-monetisable things around having a better business, doing the right thing, and societal benefits as well. So that, for me, those questions become the kind of the kick-off, and then there's the absolute need to get into the data and the detail underneath that.
Yeah. Charlotte, anything from your consultant's point of view?
I think that's really interesting because from my point, I can push it as hard as I like, but if the client, and primarily we work with landlords and developers and investors, if they don't want to put the money into it because they don't understand the bigger picture, you've hit a hurdle. So I think you're right in that there needs to be, I say education in the loosest terms, because you don't want to teach people to suck eggs, but I think people do need to understand the bigger picture of why you're actually pushing towards something. And everyone's heard it for however long now, you know, we need to do this for the planet and X, Y, Z and all of this. I think that's sort of become just a repetition in the back of people's minds.
It's just noise, isn't it, in the background?
It's just become noise. And I think if you sort of go back and you look at how things have changed over time, whether it be weather events or you can see the actual change and you look at the data. But again, it's reported on so much, but again, it's that, how do you actually get landlords to say, or those who, the decision makers to say, yes, we're going to do that?
And I think sometimes it's difficult to translate that macroeconomic discussion messaging down to sort of business and building specific issues. I think that link is absolutely key.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's that, well, you know, it doesn't affect me, so I'm not going to do it. Okay, but if everybody thought that way, nothing would ever happen. So you'll get the odd few companies or people or landlords, whatever, who go, yep, I'm going to do this. And you think, that's great. But others go, yeah, we don't need to do that. Actually, everybody needs to
Absolutely.
do it. It's got to be a team effort. Otherwise, what's the point? It's marginal gains and it all adds up.
Yeah.
Are you finding more motivation from private landlords and commercial building owners that are now concerned about the value of their stock, essentially, and the value of their assets if they've got buildings that are not achieving minimum efficiency standards?
Yes and no. If they are finding that the demand is there from their tenants, customers, the leaseholders, then yes, they'll do it. So if the push is coming from further below, they'll do it. But a lot of clients, if they've got offices that are already in demand in their current condition, why would they invest any more when they can already get the rates and the rents that they want? It's really tricky getting them to understand the bigger picture. And we do have some clients that absolutely go, no, we've got the demand, we get that, but actually we can do better. And this, as a company, for our wider strategies and our long term, they're not looking at the next sort of 10 years, they're looking at the next 50 to 100 years. They go, no, that's where we want to be making the difference. So there is some drive there, not as much as I'd like to see. It's never enough.
You and me both, yeah.
It's interesting because from a supplier partner point of view, at a strategy level, I'd say ESG, carbon, was very high on the agenda when it comes to, we had a panel yesterday about procurement strategies. It's very high on the agenda there. And actually, therefore, it drives, me as a supplier partner to actually really buy into that, because otherwise there's no work winning, there's no moving forward. And there is an element of doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I've got 6 kids, that's the right thing for us to do. But actually, it's interesting that when it actually gets down to that base level of implementing at a building position, that isn't filtering through. I wonder why at a strategy level it's become uber important, but actually it's an implementation level as a disjoint. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think, Claire, though, that the procurement piece is driven by a kind of a knowledge that you need to do that without the real understanding why? And therefore that link down to sort of very specific building issues is not quite as effective as it could be?
Yeah, I absolutely think that there's a disjoint between the purchaser and the operator. We talked about it yesterday quite a lot, but it almost seems like we're going to talk about the impact of supply chain on building end users, but actually it sounds like there needs to be a corporate integration of strategy with the operators at the same time, which seems to be missing.
Great. So let's move it on one stage. And so we've got people who want to start to move into that journey of carbon reduction. So Claire, what would your advice be to someone who was just starting on that journey? They've got a carbon reduction plan in principle, but what should they do and what's the low-hanging fruit?
So we've sitting with my business hat on, because there's kind of 2 answers to that from a building owner's perspective and a business owner's perspective. With my hat of a business owner, I sit there going, we've grown prolifically 46% last year and actually hit earmarkers for things like ESOS reporting and carbon reduction plans. Actually, and we've hit them and bypassed them before we even got to grab hold of them. However, when we analysed the data, we grew 46% last year and reduced carbon by 44% in the same period without a plan in place, which I know is big news. But actually, it was about doing the right thing. So making the decisions that feel right in your gut. I believe the same thing about profitability. If your people are happy, your clients are happy, you get happy profits. The same thing comes for me around carbon reduction. If you know you're doing the right thing, actually, you will see the benefits of doing the right thing. So things like electrifying fleet, about buying your energy from renewable places, from actually looking at your recyclables. And I also implore people to not just look at carbon reduction planning in isolation of ESG. Let's push those boundaries, because they all impact each other. Governance impacts, corporate social responsibility, charitable. It all impacts. There's a whole chain there. So for me, it's do the right thing, buy in and do the right thing. The next thing is if you don't know how to do it, go and find a partner who does. Because source 3 data planning when it comes to subcontractors, which is another area for any building user or business owner, is very difficult to collect. So you need a plan, you need a strategy, you need technology to enable you to go on that journey. So if you don't know how to do it, find someone who does. And secondly, do the right thing, because that will lead to reduction in the first place.
I think we were talking yesterday, Claire, about doing the right thing, and particularly around Scope 3, collecting that data early on, as early as possible in small
Absolutely.
businesses, because
Yeah.
once you then try to do that retrospectively and you're turning over tens of millions, the task seems huge.
You make it a monster.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Implement early on, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I find as well that the data needs collecting, but the data's sometimes not there. So, but estimate as well, because there's no embarrassment in estimating as long as it's based on facts.
Yeah.
You've got to start.
Yeah, I was going to say the
You've got to
hardest part is
start.
starting.
You've just got to start.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And not to fear the data and what the data tells you. Alistair, what about yourself in terms of your
Well,
clients?
I think from our side, as service delivery, we need to be leading from the front. So exactly what Claire said, exactly what was said there, the fact that if we're showing the lead, if we're collecting data, if we're demonstrating our position, that's got to be front and centre to actually our clients and our customers to buy into as well. So, absolutely.
We're their source 3 if you think about it,
Exactly.
aren't we? So by doing the right thing here, actually, we help them along with the goals anyway,
Yeah.
straight off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, moving on that journey, one of the key things I talked about earlier was technology, and Alistair, it's probably an area you're very familiar with, but how do you think technology can help us on that net zero
Well,
journey?
I think technology is part of the answer. It's often looked at to be the whole answer. It's absolutely not, but it's an absolute enabler. If we don't use what we have and what is out there at the moment and what will be out there in the future, then we haven't really got an opportunity. But so there are things such as, we talked about metering, we talked about measuring, we talked about benchmarking. If we can use the data to understand that to start with, that's the start. We've got technology and systems around retrofitting existing systems in buildings. How do we deploy that? And all the way through to the overarching collection and understanding of that future forecast of where your emissions are going to be, where your savings are going to be. So it needs to be part of the package, but it can't be the whole thing. You've got to employ a bit of understanding, a bit of human instinct and support on that.
I think we also tend to do it at the start. So we take a data package, we interrogate all this data, we put it into a system, we get a report, and we stop.
Yeah.
And then a year later, we go, oh my God, we need all this data again.
Yeah.
Actually, let's do this whole process. So I think there's a piece around automating that data collection so that it becomes part of what you breathe. Because otherwise, it's just something you review annually that you can only impact annually rather than looking at it on a monthly metrics that you need to report upon.
Well, we end up in kind of a data parallelism where you end up with so much data. We've got clients that gather this data, they're sitting on it, but they're not actually doing anything with it. And that's where we come in to say, like, that low-hanging fruit, there's so much out there. I mean, some of our clients, just the fact that simple things, LED lighting, inverter technology, is still not being deployed. How do we just go, right, we can measure it, we can deploy it, and then we can make that difference, and then take them on that journey? Because it's that retail analogy. You buy one thing, then you start to go on that journey. But the parallelism of just gathering data and doing that blue sky thinking isn't getting us anywhere at the moment.
But I think Mark, Claire's point is really interesting, because if we're just on that cycle of every year collecting some data, producing a report, and then putting it in the drawer, that's not the point, is it? We've got to be bought into this as a process. It's got to be real and proper. It's got to be made building specific at that level. To drive the real benefit. Otherwise, we're just going through some motions, and that feels wrong. Feels like we're not doing the right thing. To Charlotte's point,
You're not living and breathing it.
exactly.
Are you?
No.
You're not
Like,
living- exactly.
and with anything with a system, unless you're prepared to say this information's important to me because of this,
Yes.
Yeah.
then that's the fail. And I mean, it's like the LED lighting systems. You look at building stock. You talked about retrofit, which is a point very close to my heart. You can imagine in what we do, and actually. It seems pretty simple, but sometimes the building stock makes it really complicated.
Yeah.
Draft proofing in the simplest terms,
Yeah.
people talk about that. But actually, if you look at the school stock in the UK, it's such an interesting place to be, because the building stock doesn't allow really for us to be carbon neutral in the way that we'd want to be.
Well,
It's very
also,
hard.
you can't apply one rule, like as you say. Every building is different. It's one
Absolutely.
of the reasons I love my job. Every project that you get is entirely unique, but that means something you apply to one building you cannot apply to another. Same if you've got a group of assets, it's all the same. So that feedback loop, and I know that that's something that REBA have pushed on for years, is architects go in and design a building, and if let's say they're using BREEAM as well and all this stuff, and it's BREEAM excellent, it's perfect, but if it's not being used how it's been designed, what's the point? There's a total disconnect. So that push for that feedback loop to go, okay, in the future we're going to go differently and we're going to go this route instead.
Missing that potential for lessons learned.
It's that.
It's the education piece.
Yeah.
So you talked about, we're all sat here talking about, net carbon strategy. I sit here running a quite significant business. You tell me where someone came along and said, we'll train you on this.
Yeah.
The government's come across with loads of these targets, but actually, and then finding that training from a point of view that isn't skewed and monetised or commercialised for a benefit, somebody wanting you to purchase something, so you can actually get at the real data that should be driving you. Quite difficult.
Absolutely, yeah, it is.
I think it's challenging as well for small businesses, because quite often that education piece and responsibility comes down to the managing director and the owner and the founder.
When it's smaller, it's difficult.
Exactly. There's not the resources there to hire somebody in or pay for that level of partnership. So you've got someone that's, under kind of 5 million turnover trying to run a busy business and get this thing off the ground. And at the same time now having to educate themselves in all different policies and understand how they can influence and how it impacts them.
We have a comment from online, what somebody said, that's a challenge for small to medium companies is the investment needed to satisfy their demands from their customers and their supply partners. So that whole SME area is a...
Yeah, and we see it in the businesses that we work with and invest in, there's a struggle, there's definitely a struggle there, and there's no real clear answer on that either. I'll talk a little bit later on about the flip side, which is there's actually a lot of opportunities now as well for small businesses in terms of, you mentioned extra work and different services you can provide, consultancy services. There's businesses here that perhaps wouldn't be here without that general push countrywide and industry-wide.
I would really implore the small business owners. I mean, something that obviously I'm a massive advocate of is BESA. And I'm like that because the benefits of being part of a trade association are that you can get purist information, not from a commercialised organisation that's trying to get you to purchase something, but just from a technical specification and guidance point of view. So I'd say to the SMEs out there, take part in industry. If you want to create momentum, you have to take part, and if you want to learn, then you have to go to a source where you can learn. There's lots of advantages in being part of that wider industry community.
Claire, I'm really interested to know, as the leader of a large organisation, how do you make sure that message gets down to all of your colleagues? So you're sharing that ethos and approach.
So I think Linaker's been an interesting journey because we've obviously gone from SME type territory into a larger organisation, and engagement, I'm afraid, is the key sense. So people talk to me about how I implore the engineers to do the right thing. I don't put them in a posh meeting room where they feel intimidated. I do pint a pint and brew in a butty with a projector on the wall in a meeting room, and we talk about business strategy and we talk about engagement, and that's the reason why we sit here with 70% retention in an industry that's normally benchmarked at 46 across the engineering base. So I go back to, this isn't a pie in the sky thinking strategy. It's implementation in action. You've got to be tactical about it. You've got to talk to people like they're human beings, and you've got to make them understand why you're doing it, not just that you're doing it.
And the impact that they can have on those outcomes.
That they can actually change the face of what the business looks like, and be involved in its culture, take ownership for their careers, and actually, that we see a very high level of internal promotion in the business because people want to be part of the journey. We have to make them want to be part of the journey. That's the fundamental change.
I think the data piece comes back into this as well. You've got that data that you've then collected, and it's showing, progress towards common goals in the business. And now, how do you make that data visual, easy to understand, and make sure that it's communicated down to your team? You often see businesses that want to show progress to a client or as part of a tender response or whatever it may be, but then neglect to actually get the team on board and say, look what we're doing, guys. That effort you're making is actually really paying off and having a benefit. Absolutely. Keep going, because this graph is going in one direction.
I think as an industry, we see professionalism as conservatism, and obviously that doesn't sit very well with me. You can imagine. I'm trying my hardest not to be blue or make any sweary remarks, because I can be a bit colourful like that. We're in an engineering business after all. But I think it's about being authentic. So you talk about a journey. If you want people to believe in the journey you're on, you've got to be authentic. You don't need to emulate someone else's successes. Just have the personality that you have, because people have already bought into that. That's key for me.
Sometimes this change is hard as well. It's the silly things. There's been businesses I've been involved in that want to set a net zero target and go on that journey, and then you walk in the office and it's like a sauna and it's set at 31 degrees, and it's, you know,
In July.
exactly. They've got two
I've been
windows
in that
open and the
office.
heat.
I've been there.
Exactly. We've all been in those environments, and that is hard. You've then got to communicate to so and so in the corner who's, you know, might be freezing in early, that actually we're all on this journey together. So it goes back to the point about trying to get that engagement.
It's accepting that it's not going to be a tick in the box and it's
not
done.
perfect.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's-
and actually, if
yeah.
you share with your team members that it's hard,
Yeah.
they get it. It's worse to sit there and say, we're going to do this on a breeze. We're going to carbon reduce
Yeah.
by 30%.
Yeah, it's
we're
gonna
going to
be
hit the
really
government
easy,
target.
fine.
You know, the
Yeah.
jazz hands piece doesn't
Yeah.
work. People aren't stupid.
Yeah.
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 So a member of the audience, maybe Charlotte, you could we have the problem that most of our settings are either listed building or within conservation areas. So any advice and thoughts on that?
Feel for it.
I think I've done quite a lot of work with listed and heritage assets, and they're always quite interesting because they have, in themselves, they have their own challenges, let alone wanting to make them super energy efficient. However, there is a disconnect between modern construction and traditional historic construction. And there was a reason buildings were built the way they were historically. Arguably, they were built for a different climate. We can all agree that. But buildings were also used in a different way. So some of the things like having, you know, if you've got timber shutters on windows, or in the winter people used to hang up tapestries, that wasn't for decoration. That was actually to stop the walls absorbing all the heat. So that buildings are built in an entirely different way. So yeah, they have their challenges on their own. There are things that can be done. Obviously, it will often come down to your local friendly conservation officer. And we know that they vary. So yeah, they have challenges in themselves, but there are opportunities there. But also understanding that those buildings just work differently.
Yes.
I think with conservation areas or listed building, it comes down to a balanced approach. Actually, it comes down to, look at any estate, it's about a balanced approach. Are you going to get every single building to a net zero position?
Absolutely.
Probably not.
No.
Can you look at your entire estate and balance it and say, this is where we're going to focus on this, and then move it across? And then you can look at it, not from a de minimis point of view, but actually holistically, we're doing the right thing and taking it on that journey.
I think we also miss a little part. We talk about the operational carbon here, right? Not the whole journey. But if you look at some of those beautiful buildings that were built way back when, that aren't going to last 70 years, that have lasted 400 years, actually, and you look at their embodied carbon status, you sit there and go, in terms of the whole life carbon piece compared to our modern buildings, now we might use less to operate, but over the whole life, those buildings have done much better than the ones that we build these days.
Very good point.
Yeah.
So I think people miss a trick when they talk about and I'm not denying that we should absolutely try and do what we need to do with those buildings, but I think we just need to make sure that we're thinking about the whole process.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we start to knock down buildings that actually, in the process, we negatively impact the environment for that reason.
Yes. Yeah. As well, there's lots of technology available that can be used in listed buildings. I met a company the other day that does an infrared film that uses very little energy, that's ideal for listed buildings and can be installed very, very easy. So there's lots of, I think there's no silver bullet in terms of the solution. So.
But the other thing, Mark, I go back to the point about overarching, what is the point of your strategy? Is it to become net zero in a castle, heritage assets, which is very unlikely and very difficult. But actually, what are you genuinely trying to achieve as an organisation? I mean, yes, it needs to be challenging, to Claire's point, but it needs to be achievable as well. And that needs to be sort of taken in the round as your actual specific organisational strategy, and not just the kind of rhetoric that comes from the government and other organisations. It needs to be made specific.
Yeah, there has to be a reason that you're
It's
doing
the why,
what
isn't
you're
it?
doing.
It's the why.
Exactly.
It's the why.
Yeah.
And Harry, from your point of view, from the investment side and the business value, what have you seen in the marketplace about how ESG and particularly carbon reduction, when you link it to that strategy, we talked about doing the right thing and everything else, but in terms of your value to your business of doing that?
Yeah, I've picked up on a couple of those points already. I think it is genuinely a really exciting time, and it's very rare in life or business as a whole that there is a financial reward for doing the right thing. You can. And we're in this period now where that is certainly the case, and that's for a number of different reasons. There's a variety of services that facilities and single kind of service providers can now offer. There's the consultancy piece. There's clients that are looking for advice on how to solve these problems. There's retrofit works off the back of it because now there's money coming into it because people are adding that pressure, and rightly so. So there's great opportunities in that instance. And then equally, I think we've seen a couple of kind of, let's call them flagship deals in people that have sold businesses recently that have got much higher sale value and much higher multiples than they would have had if they didn't have the focus that ran through their business on ESG values and carbon reduction methods. So now there's almost like a real kind of actually tangible monetary value to focusing on this, which drives motivation.
Yep.
And at the same time, again, going back to my point, you're being rewarded for acting in the right way and acting morally, but then also increasing your added value. And there'll be loads of small business owners that are watching this, and we would always advise our businesses to think about that right from the start.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what your size is, doesn't matter how much you're turning over. Let's embed those kind of values and that kind of skill set, that knowledge within the team right from the start, and see that kind of benefit through to our clients and hopefully to their individual businesses there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think we talk about monetary value. One of the best routes to market we've seen from a carbon dot position is physically going in and saving money for the operation. So energy usage, how do we reduce that? And that's been the best way. We can absolutely capture all the carbon reduction and everything retrospectively, but just the initial pain point is our energy bills have gone up, our capacity is overloaded. We want to do other great things, electric vehicles, etc. We haven't got the capacity on the incomer. So actually, how can we reduce that and physically save money, either in year or in a finite quantum after that? So that's been leaps and bounds the best way. If you go into businesses and say, it's about your carbon journey, it's about your strategy, there's a disjoint between strategy and operations. We've discussed that. Yeah. So the best thing we've seen is go in, physically save the money, and it's a win-win-win off the back of that. So yeah, there's large-term strategic investment opportunities, but just on the ground, physical saving.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the questions from the audience is, does net zero carbon 2050 consider embodied carbon in buildings, or is it just purely operational? And Claire, you touched on embodied carbon. And for me, embodied carbon is still a very embryonic measurement, and but I think that's where the FM industry is going to be heading in terms of that. So do you have a view on embodied carbon?
I think it's, we can't even measure the data that we have to start with. I think if you're getting, you source one, your energy bills, you source two, your fleet, which, you talk about saving cash. It's really funny that the built environment in terms of emitting carbon out into the world is majority around transporting materials and transporting people to jobs. So it's interesting that fleet is quite high on that agenda. But source three in terms of suppliers and wholesale production of how that helps your operation, and even for building owners in the same category, I think we need to get there first before we then talk about embodied carbon, because it's just, then you're talking about the utility journey. And there seems to be lots of wonderful things we're doing about the production of energy, but I'm not sure we've found one that works yet. I think some of the Nordic countries are doing a hell of a lot better than we are in that plight.
I think you mentioned earlier about the education piece, and education, we have to understand, does take time. People need to come to terms and understand different elements, and getting their head around Scope 3 emissions is still a challenge for a lot of people, understanding how they measure and how they influence that. So yeah, we have to be a little bit patient in that regard as well. Okay.
I think there's also quite a lot of work going around in terms of carbon assessments, because you've got the built environment carbon database that's come out. You've also got the net zero standard that's come out as a pilot version as well, and the RICS whole life carbon assessment. So all of that, I mean, they all link in together, but again, they're all in their sort of early stages, and people are still getting their head around how they work. And again, that goes back to the education piece. As consultants, we've got to spend our time learning those assessments.
How do you decide which assessment is
professional standards?
Here we go again, where electric chargers on cars, you don't have one plug, we have 5 different plugs to do the same thing. There's no standardisation of kind of infrastructure, and it feels the same way when new standards come out, doesn't it? That actually we don't just have one standard which says this is the standard. We end up with 4 or 5 different competing professional bodies to try and meet that standard. It's quite interesting.
So the pilot version of the net zero carbon building standard that came out in September, and it is a pilot version, that's at an organisational level. So that has been with RICS, REBA, I mean, the list is enormous. There's been hundreds of people working on it. And the idea of that is that everyone's talking about net zero carbon and what that actually means. The idea behind that standard is that actually we're all working from the same hymn sheet. So you're all using the same units of measurement. You're all using the same assessment methods. So rather than saying, oh, I'm using this standard. No, I'm using that standard.
We've still got another two standards since then.
It's they should eventually all feed into one another.
I think that's the biggest problem, though, with all of this. Actually, there's standards. There's even talk about carbon. None of it translates to the operators on the ground, the day-to-day users.
Absolutely.
Because it means nothing. I know there's equations and there's calculations on how we get there, but it doesn't actually mean anything to the layman, the decision makers ultimately. So we've got a big job to just simplify it, to just say it is just this. I always use brake horsepower as an example. No one knew what it meant. How do you get the power of that engine? It's X amount of horses, and this is what you go with. When you do something like that with carbon, it just makes it really simple. People can get behind, and then we can all move forward with what it means and what we're trying to achieve from it. So I think that's the biggest problem. This disjoint again, strategy and operations. There's a disjoint between standards and what it is versus actually what we need to do on the ground in reality. So I think that's the biggest challenge.
Just linking it on to you talked about training. Somebody's asked the question, any recommendations for training for those keen on understanding how to gather data for carbon within the built environment?
Go and take part in your local trade association is my answer, which is exactly what I'm going to say. You can go and look at a consultant, but I think you get caught up in what standard to go for, what measurement tool, what different guidance and advice. And I'm sure you guys have give them all the options, but then it just leads to another knowledge point. Does that make where you're then trying to decipher that guidance? It's quite difficult. But yet I would go out to industry and speak to other people in industry who have got because we've all got the same problem, right?
I think Claire mentioned as well earlier about partnerships and finding those companies that can assist. There's businesses out there, Planet Mark, for example, and some others that embody that education piece as well as part of their offering. So particularly if you're a small business owner, you're an MD trying to understand that, you're doing the piece of gathering that data, starting to benchmark, going on your journey, and at the same time getting that education. And I believe they're due to launch a more kind of affordable version and a more of a light touch version.
There's 10 of those though, isn't there? There's like
exactly.
There's neutral carbon zone. There's like 6 or 7 different companies in that space to choose from.
Exactly.
And the first thing is, how do you choose?
Yeah, very true.
So that's the starting point for me. Was I don't even know how to choose the right organisation who's going to give me the right guidance. And how are they accredited? How do I actually know? It's kind of like fire door companies. You go, are they certified to the new standard? It's that piece of information that's quite difficult, I think, for SMEs.
And there's 2 very distinct pieces here. So we talked about earlier, we've got SMEs, business owners, and we are probably leading a bit when it comes to our own workforces, buying into what we're doing, demonstrating. And then there's the client, the building owners, the landlords, and they're on a journey as well. So the fact that we're getting accredited, neutral carbon zone again, we're all learning and making our workforces and demonstrating our own businesses. It's then how do we transpose that to our clients, our customers? And that's the 2 distinct parts in the built environment that we've just got to cross over and
So
from business.
You've got assessment differences, and then you've also got different accrediting bodies who again are still fighting to be the accreditor. So it's like construction, like an alchemy. You've got that same problem again in industry. There's a lot of confusion.
It goes back to your point, Claire, sorry, about essentially you have achieved those carbon reduction measures without an actual plan in place. Just doing the right thing, an element of common sense, certainly an element of I'd always advise both clients and business owners to benchmark and start to understand where you're at now, because again the whole data piece comes into it, and how do you then use that data as motivation for everybody if you can't say this is where we were. That's a real key point. But ultimately just again do the right thing and use real intelligent people, and business owners are all switched on, generally speaking, so keep doing that.
Is the asset register the start of that data? We had a question from the audience saying...
Back there again.
We're back onto asset registers. But would the panel support making asset registers for building owners a mandatory requirement?
I think we had a great discussion yesterday on procurement as well. How can you procure something you don't know what you've got? How can you maintain something if you don't know what you've got? And it comes right down to, how can you save carbon or energy on assets you don't have. And I think we are getting closer and closer to a mandatory requirement to understand your assets and identify. And then you get into condition, then you get into plans and go from there. But yeah, I think it's fundamentally everything we do in the built environment.
I would go further than that. I would say not only should it be mandatory, it should be in a mandatory format. Because
Yeah.
we know what it's
Again, so everyone's working off the same
exactly.
initiative.
You get this sort of world of difference between asset list A and asset list B, and you can't tell one from the other. It's just nonsense. So yeah, I think they need to be mandated, and it needs to be in a format, or certainly within a template and boundaries of a format, so that we all know what we're looking at.
I think we mentioned, we discussed it yesterday around procurement, that one of the things that may come out of the Grenfell incident is that and the Building Safety Act is that greater ownership. I think we spoke about it yesterday from a client side in understanding their buildings and understanding their assets and actually communicating that data out. So I think we're seeing, as you mentioned, Alistair, that such slight changes towards that. And I think if we fast forward a few years, we'll probably be a lot closer to being there. I think that will be a massive change in the industry for that.
I'll go on to some questions, quite keen to get through as many as we can, so we'll probably jump around a little bit here. But how can policymakers and businesses collaborate to create effective frameworks for achieving net zero targets?
I think this goes back to the caring about it, and you've got to care about
Exactly.
it. The first point to making any type of facility solution supplier, building owner, consultant, client relationship work is you both got to care about the subject to start with. And then you've got to have trust to have open communication so that you can discuss what the problems are in that strategy, which is where I think we tend to fall down because what we realise we haven't got the budget to do what we want to do. But that tends to be a stop point rather than us turning around and saying, well, how do we create a saving that can enable us to then make some investment? So for me, the biggest point is choose a partner and work with them openly, share your strategy, share what you care about, share what your goals are, both have the same goals. I mean, that would be an enlightening experience straight away.
And this doesn't need to restrict itself to net zero targets either.
It's
That actually is, our world matures, our market matures, your market matures, Claire. We need to find those ways of doing that, or having that relationship much more constructively. So, vested principles, all that sort of good stuff, I think is the future where that will absolutely play out.
The other thing is break it down into small steps, because I think if you come out and go, right, we want to make this, net carbon zero, and you go, okay,
in 25 years' time,
that's enormous. That actually is that can be pretty scary. It's a pretty big undertaking. So, okay, that's the thing that you want to achieve at the end. Break it down into the small steps. Just do it one bit at a time, and before you know it, you'll be there. You'll be nearly there. But don't jump from A to B and think, done.
Well, and the other thing is that allows you to demonstrate success along the way, doesn't it? Which keeps everyone's motivation up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
For me, I think there's also the fact that the funding issue, that's what policymakers need to address as well. The public sector has got lots of funding available. The private sector has less so. So when we're looking at these business cases, the payback can be 10 or 12 years. And most private sector businesses won't carry that. So I think policymakers need to work out a way to fund for the private sector that's going to make all of this happen. And I know there are discussions ongoing with some of the private equity people to try and provide funds to get that through. So I think there's another element there that needs to be closed down as well. So, great. Another question from Reese is, do you believe that part of the training piece is getting building operators to understand the plant strategy to improve efficiency on systems?
I think there's been, in the cyclic nature of our industry between, and we talked about this yesterday as well, between specialist and generalist, which tends to be a 8 or 10-year cycle that happens, is unfortunately client side there are a lot of really intelligent clients out there who want to learn and are a student of the industry and therefore do a very good job of managing their portfolios. But in this cyclic piece that we've been through, the ins and outs of TUPE and negotiation in that piece, that's meant a lot of the client side knowledge has been lost or given to the supplier. So I do think there's a real piece of having education available for building owners and building users and building managers to an industry level standard. I know there's some IDFN standards here that apply as well, but specifically for people managing buildings, especially with the Building Safety Act and the new golden thread that's come in, and the emphasis on where those problems are owned. I think there needs to be an availability of training courses for those people, and I know CPD used to do an awful lot of that type of training, but I think it's fell by the wayside a little bit. And I think it would be really interesting to see those training courses come back online, because I absolutely know that the majority of clients that I work with are inherently interested in their portfolios and would love the opportunity to learn, but just can't access those training courses.
I think to emulate what Claire said, it is competency. There's an override. It's not just about the energy saving, it's competency across the board when it comes to engineering, maintaining these assets. And it has been outsourced, and it now does sit with the service provider predominantly to deliver that. So, and then that comes all the way back to that trust with the client, actually what we're saying, what we're supporting them with, where the experts are suggesting. It's not just a commercial reason, there are real reasons behind it with longevity, whether that's energy saving, whether that's overall asset life enhancement. So yeah, I think it's changed from sitting predominantly in-house, as much as clients would love it to. They just haven't got the ability to nowadays with the workforce. So it's very much working with your service provider and consultants, etc., to support them on that journey with that competency.
I think the trust point is massive, and that openness, and I'd always encourage business owners to sit down with their clients and say, look, can we discuss your net zero plans, and I'll discuss mine with you, and can we have that level of open conversation about where perhaps we might have shared gaps in knowledge and what we can do about it, and sometimes that's difficult. It's all right for me to say that as a pie in the sky, and there are challenging clients, challenging buildings where that's not always the case. But wherever it is possible, I'd always encourage people to do that, to have the confidence to do that, because 9 times out of 10, the response you get back is a very positive one.
Right. Let's talk about the skills gap. You mentioned that skills, it's obviously something on not just across the carbon piece, but we are talking about net zero and carbon. How do we as an industry address the skills shortage that we're facing? Big question.
Where do you start?
Yeah, go.
You said it.
But I think before you look at that, there's that standardisation point, because what skills are you aspiring to fill the gap from? So I think once we get that standardisation piece at least started, then it will help us kind of identify the gap and how we need to fill that in. But beyond that, it's going to be enormous.
Okay.
I think as well there's a lot of knowledge in the industry with engineers that perhaps that can be essentially redirected. They don't really understand what they know.
Yeah.
They're so focused on efficiency of kit and actually keeping it running, keeping it maintained, keeping it compliant. Actually, a lot of that knowledge translates into decarbonisation, energy efficiency measures, but perhaps haven't been shown the link between the two and making that connecting piece visible for them. And that's workshops, that's education, that's training, and putting the right people together.
Yeah, I mean, it's Claire's communications, isn't it? I mean, absolutely, that's where it's got to go.
Yeah.
I think when you talk skills gap, though, I'm going to bang a drum I normally do, which is, and you will laugh, but yeah, the veterans world, obviously, we've got a lot of skilled and drilled and competent individuals transitioning from the military. And this is an industry that is just crying out for that level of leadership, that level of competency. And it's something we're really keen on, and it's an oven-ready result that we can bring them in to support, not just hard services, soft services, leadership, management, operations. So, watch this space from our side. But,
I'd echo that. The net zero market is really interested in veterans. I know I'm mentoring quite a few at the moment who want to get in this marketplace. So,
I have never heard anyone say, I don't want to be trained.
No.
Isn't it funny that we all sit here talking about skills gap? Yeah. I wonder how many people are living and breathing that training. 30% of our engineers currently are in cross-skill training. I think there's lots of different facets to that, and it's marginal gain because the resource is finite, right? Yeah. We have what we have. That's not infinite. So you've got to look outside that piece. We do a lot of work with the Veterans Network, and I think you need to look on the apprentice schemes. And again, I go back to, there's no point in moaning about a skills gap and then not getting involved in industry. Yeah. There are trade associations that setting occupational standards about what apprentices are what's going to be in their core curriculum. Get involved. Yeah. Be part of that movement. Take accountability for it.
Don't leave it to somebody else.
Yeah,
do it yourself.
Make a better industry. And actually, if we all make a better industry, then we're all going to be on that journey together
Yeah.
rather than there's enough work for everybody.
Yeah.
And all the different models and all the different guises. We just need to work together to create a better whole industry.
Yeah.
And running a business as well, you want to retain your staff. Because
Absolutely.
you want to train them.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And you know, the monetary remuneration is one thing, but actually the training, the investing in the teams, as Claire alluded to, if you can invest in your own teams, that's great. It keeps you in retention. It makes it a more commercially viable model from a business point of view. So it's just a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Forward investment in your team is paramount.
Well, thank you. On that note, we've run out of time, so I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of you for your information and your knowledge. It's been really interesting. I think we've got a huge challenge against us in the industry, but certainly you've raised some fantastic issues, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.